CBS News in Ottawa, Canada, this is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather and Bob Schieffer in our newsroom in New York.
Good evening. The Economic Summit meeting of the leaders of the world's major democratic industrial nations is over. The discussions got sidetracked by renewed violence in the Middle East, but before the meeting ended in Ottawa today, the heads of government got back on track and concentrated on economics. Bill Plant has the details.
The final communiqué assigned the highest priority to bringing down inflation and unemployment, and agreed as well on the need to reduce public borrowing and keep the money supply down. In short, the basic economic objectives of the Reagan administration, to which only the French took partial exception. The communiqué acknowledges that interest rates, the greatest public complaint of the other allies against the U.S., have been a problem. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, the summit host, said there had been no attempt to hide the disagreements of the leaders. But President Reagan, in his final remarks, did not mention any differences.
We've discussed at great length how each one of us is addressing economic problems at home while working in concert to assure that we're sensitive to the impact of our actions upon our partners. I'm grateful to the other leaders here for their degree of understanding and support for the economic policies we're embarked upon in the United States.
But West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt was clearly not quite satisfied with the issue of interest rates.
President Reagan, too, has told us that the American economy is also suffering from high interest rates. It has not yet been able to see whether the fight against inflation in the United States might take certain different paths.
A somewhat weary-looking Ronald Reagan began his last day at the summit with a breakfast meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Suzuki. The two men discussed trade, but apparently not specifically the question of auto exports to the U.S. Suzuki told the president that relations between Japan and the U.S. had never been better. Mr. Reagan came to the morning session with a jar of his famous jelly beans, and by the time the leaders had seated themselves to begin working out the language of the final communique, the jelly beans were making their way around the table. Much of the time in the line-by-line examination of the final document was devoted to a successful United States effort to strengthen the section on East-West trade, a polite battle with the Germans who did not want trade with the Soviet bloc linked to political considerations. At midday, the leaders departed the rustic serenity of Montebello, each in his own helicopter, for lunch and a final meeting in the Canadian capital city of Ottawa, some 40 miles away. Despite reports that he was tired by the meetings and the concurrent Mideast crisis, Mr. Reagan's aides said that he relished the atmosphere of the summit talks. They described him as challenged by the give and take, particularly that with the often blunt Chancellor Schmidt. A senior administration official described the language of the final communique as a victory for the United States. He ticked off the section on the economy and dismissed complaints over high interest rates as posturing for home consumption. He called the decision to review Allied trade with the Soviets for security reasons and the agreement to review aid to the developing nations victories for the U.S. as well. All in all, he said, we got pretty much everything we wanted. Bill Plant, CBS News, Ottawa.
CBS News will present a special broadcast about the Ottawa Economic Summit tonight at 11:30, 10:30 Central Time. And we'll have more about the summit on this broadcast later.
Presenting Gold Label VO5 Hairspray, the best VO5 yet. Its incredible 14-hour hold has been improved to look more natural. So natural, your hair moves this free, this easy, yet holds this beautifully.
Hold with the gold.
Alberto VO5 Hairspray, with improved 14-hour hold to look more natural.
Hold with the gold.
In aerosol or fine mist pump.
Hey, what's this? No homecoming kiss? What's wrong, babe?
Oh, Jonathan, it's your breath.
My breath? That bad?
You need Clorets, the breath deodorant.
The breath deodorant? Sounds strong.
Clorets with Actazole is strong to deodorize mouth odors. It helps your mouth's own freshening power eliminate bad breath.
Terrific. Cost much?
A little more.
But for the breath deodorant, it's worth it.
Clorets, the breath deodorant.
There was no official Israeli reaction today to President Reagan's decision to postpone delivery of 10 F-16 warplanes to Israel. After a cabinet meeting in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Reagan gave Special U.S. Envoy Philip Habib the go-ahead to seek a ceasefire in the cross-border violence. But Reagan said until that ceasefire is secured, the Israeli attacks into southern Lebanon will go on. And they did. We have two reports from Bob Simon in Israel and Larry Pentak in Lebanon.
There was no breakthrough in Jerusalem today, but there was no breakdown. After meeting with Prime Minister Begin this evening, U.S. Envoy Philip Habib made it clear that a ceasefire had not yet been agreed upon, but that his shuttle diplomacy will continue.
I will proceed with my mission, as directed by President Reagan, to seek to secure a ceasefire along the Israeli-Lebanese border as a first step to bringing calm to the area.
Begin did not use the term ceasefire. He said Israel had agreed that Habib contact the government of Lebanon with the aim of establishing peaceful relations with Lebanon. Israel will not authorize negotiations, direct or indirect, with the PLO.
The government will continue to defend the citizens of Israel. This is its right and duty.
Shells and rockets continue to land in northern Israel today, where the siege has developed into a kind of desolate lifestyle. In Nahariya, people barely pay attention when they hear an explosion or a call for everyone to go down to the shelters. Kibbutz members move out of damaged homes carrying what they need, half a dozen shirts and a submachine gun. Military convoys continue to plow their way northwards in case this Habib mission should fail. Bob Simon, CBS News, Jerusalem.
Smoke once more rose over Rashidia camp today as Israel again trained its artillery on the sprawling refugee township. Rashidia lies just 10 miles from the Israeli border. Its 10,000 residents have endured daily shelling like this for more than a week. Guerrillas operate in the forest and orchards around the camp, but there are few inside. To the east, streets were deserted in the market town of Nabatea. The few civilians who remain sought cover as Israeli jets passed overhead and Israeli artillery pounded guerrilla targets nearby. UN peacekeeping troops near the border are powerless to stop the artillery, rockets and planes from passing over their positions. But the soldiers last night did manage to intercept and disarm two groups of guerrillas trying to infiltrate the UN buffer zone. Traffic flowed over makeshift crossings on the Litani River today. No new Israeli attacks on roads or bridges were reported. But the repairs are only temporary. The Lebanese government estimates it will cost $25 million to restore the bridges. In Beirut, the Muslim half of the city paused today to mourn the dead of the past week. Government estimates put the toll well over 300. Shopkeepers pulled down their shutters, and the usually teeming streets were virtually empty. With anti-American sentiments in this country rising as a result of the raid, the U.S. Embassy has unofficially put out word that it might be a good idea for Americans living here to stick close to home. Larry Pentak, CBS News, Beirut.
Magic. After all our years of feuding, wasn't.
Why do frosted MiniWheats taste so good? People take sides.
Crunchy wheat. Nicely sweet. And I say crunchy wheat. Them's feuding words.
Kellogg's Frosted MiniWheats. Whole wheat goodness on one side, light frosting on the other.
Delicious. Well said, neighbor.
Kellogg's will help you say it's gonna be a great day.
Now, 1982 Chevy Cavalier, our most completely equipped new car ever. Complete from A to Z. Take A. AM radio with digital clock. R. Reclining front seats. P. Power brakes. D.
Defoggers rear and side.
V.
Value.
Y.
Yankee built.
S.
Standard features. 43.
1982 Chevy Cavalier, the complete car. Now at your Chevy dealers.
The threatened postal strike has been called off. The two unions and the Postal Service thought they'd reached an accord this morning, then got into an argument over what was in the agreement. They finally settled it all this afternoon, and as that was announced, the Post Office used the occasion to push once more for a 2-cent raise in first-class mail rates. Lim Tucker reports.
After working through the midnight deadline and through the day, the negotiators at last had a tentative agreement.
Well, the package is going to allow us to provide good postal service, decent rates over the next 3 years.
Bolger said the agreement, which will cost close to $5 billion over the next 3 years, will not cause the price of postage to go up. The pact will raise each employee's salary around $2,100 by 1984, plus cost of living allowances. Wages of postal employees now average around $20,000. Union officials who had rejected the first two offers from the Postal Service seem delighted with this agreement.
Considering the top productivity of the postal workers being the tops in the entire world, we feel it's a good contract and that the membership will ratify it.
One big factor which may have helped keep the union at the bargaining table was the administration's tough stance, threatening to send striking federal employees to jail and/or fire them. It was, said one union official, never very far from our thoughts. Lem Tucker, CBS News, Washington.
The list of about 2,500 Americans missing and presumed dead in the Vietnam War was reduced today. The Pentagon confirmed the identities of 3 servicemen whose remains were turned over by Hanoi earlier this month. George Herman has that story.
The bodies which arrived in Hawaii July 8th have now been identified by Defense Department experts as those of 2 Navy and 1 Air Force flyers. Colonel John Furr, the Pentagon's principal advisor on MIAs, gave the names as Navy Commander Ronald Dodge, shot down May 17, 1967. Navy Lieutenant Stephen Musselman, shot down September 10, 1972. And Air Force Captain Richard Van Dyke, shot down September 11, 1968. Colonel Furr, a former POW himself, thinks the Vietnamese are concealing even more information.
There are a good number of individuals. I would estimate that there are better than 160 individuals that we have a strong reason to believe the Vietnamese could account for or provide a significant amount of information so we could resolve the cases.
My first reaction was, he said, "This is Colonel Gratz, do you remember me?" And I said, do you have some news for me? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I know what it is. And he said, yes, I think you do.
War is not a pretty thing, and I hope we are never involved in another one. But he felt that he said, I must do this as much as any other young man.
They tell me I'm a widow. Am I really a widow? Now I know I am really a widow. I have friends and even people in this that have to still wonder, because the Vietnamese have been so cruel in this. I feel it's cruel.
The Dodge children left immediately to join their mother in Washington. The whole family will attend a full military funeral in Arlington National Cemetery on Friday. George Herman, CBS News, Washington.
House Ways and Means Committee today voted to add a 3rd year to the Democrats' tax cut bill, but the cut would go in effect only if inflation had dipped below 6%. President Reagan wants a 3-year cut with no strings attached. Drawing support from demonstrators outside but not from votes on the floor, Senate Democrats today lost an attempt to save the Social Security minimum retirement benefit. Even so, the issue is far from dead, as Phil Jones reports.
As all the voting was occurring today, senior citizens were gathering on the Capitol steps to protest Social Security cuts. But the protest had no effect on the Senate, which rejected by a vote of 52 to 46 an attempt to preserve the $122 a month minimum benefit, a benefit that President Reagan has suggested for elimination. A short time later, over in the House, the same issue. What about those 3 million who will be affected by elimination of the minimum benefits?
Among these are some of the oldest and the poorest in our society. They have nobody to protect them except the members of this Congress. I trust that we will not betray their faith nor disappoint them.
But Republican leader Michael argued for a change.
There are people on the rolls who don't belong there. The truth is that the Congress has never had the courage to face up to these facts.
Rhetoric over, the resolution passed 405 to 13. It was only a non-binding resolution. And outside, the problems remained. A rally of the National Council of Senior Citizens. And it was a ready-made audience for Democrats to predict that the final battle on this issue will come in the '82 congressional elections.
Then the great army of senior citizens, 24 million strong,
is going to march to that ballot box and they're going to say, lay your foul hands off of Social Security.
The president won his battle here today, but in these votes are clear signals that if the president intends to stick with his plan to eliminate the minimum monthly benefit, he's in for the political battle of his presidency. Phil Jones, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
The Reagan administration today asked a federal judge to reject Chicago's school desegregation plan. Among other things, the plan would have delayed mandatory measures, including busing, for 2 years. The administration contended the plan relies on failed methods of the past, rather than exploring the range of voluntary techniques to encourage desegregation. Chrysler tomorrow will report its first quarterly profit in nearly 3 years. That from United Auto Workers President Douglas Frazier, who's a member of the Chrysler board. He says the company turned a profit during the second quarter of this year. That company chairman Lee Iacocca will make it official tomorrow. The Commerce Department reports that for the third straight month, personal income of Americans increased a modest 0.6% in June. The department said that personal spending jumped 0.9%. That's up 0.2% in May.
Polident presents Martha Ray, movie star, denture wearer.
Folks, I've used Polident for years, but now there's something that cleans my dentures even better. It's fantastic. New Extra Strength Polident. Watch it work on this tough lab stain. New Extra Strength Polident has 50% more of a special stain remover. 50% more. Gets those stains clean, even in between. So take it from a big mouth. New Polident Green gets tough stains clean with extra strength.
Imagine life today without oil and natural gas. We still depend on them for almost 3/4 of our energy, and until other sources can be fully developed, we need to find more oil and gas, and we need to use less energy. If you'd like more information, it's available in the Energy Countdown book, free from Shell. Shell believes there is an answer to our energy problems. It is to find more and to use less.
From the Senate today came an accusation of foot-dragging by the Reagan administration on furnishing information about past financial dealings of CIA Director William Casey. Robert Shackney has that story.
The Senate Intelligence Committee had wanted a look at Justice Department files gathered during the background check on CIA Director William Casey, and also files on a former Casey business partner alleged to have ties to organized crime. The committee's ranking Democrat charged that for over a day, the White House and the Justice Department had refused to turn over these files to committee lawyers, or even to respond to phone calls.
And we call the White House. And we call the White House, and we call the White House, and nobody answers. I have called the Attorney General, and I have called the Attorney General. He does not answer. If this administration wants Mr. Casey to stay in office, they better start answering the phone calls of Mr. Blake and Dr. Shulsky. If they are going to cover up, they are going to lose themselves a director of CIA right fast.
At issue is a published report that Carl Beal, a business associate of Casey in a now bankrupt land venture, had been identified in Justice Department files as an associate of organized crime figures active in the waterfronts of New Orleans and Galveston, Texas. By late today, after Moynihan's public protest, the White House counsel and the Justice Department had returned the senator's calls and promised to make the Justice Department files available. As of this evening, committee lawyers still had not seen the documents. Robert Shackney, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
With a blast at the prosecution, a Los Angeles judge today refused to dismiss 10 Hillside Strangler murder charges against Angelo Buono. The district attorney's office had recommended dropping the charges after its chief witness, Kenneth Bianchi, who had pleaded guilty to 5 of the slayings, recanted and offered inconsistent testimony about Buono during pretrial hearings last week. The judge today said he refused to be a rubber stamp for the prosecution, indicated he believes there is sufficient evidence to prosecute Buono. At least 3 lawsuits seeking a total of $105 million were filed today in connection with the Hyatt Regency Hotel tragedy in Kansas City, which left 111 people dead. Meanwhile, as Bernard Goldberg reports, questions are being raised about architectural features of the hotel and other contemporary buildings.
While investigators are still trying to figure out why it happened, why two 120-foot-long steel and concrete walkways collapsed onto a crowded dance floor, a report from Washington today is sounding an alarm about similar long-span walkways and entire buildings that use beams over 100 feet long in their construction. The warning by the American Institute of Architects is that the longer the span, the greater the risk.
There is a particular risk as you go further and further out in long span, and I don't believe that many of the people who desire extremely long spans understand the risks that are involved in making that decision.
The study was launched nearly 2 years ago, following the collapse of the Kemper Arena's roof in Kansas City and the collapse of several other modern long-span structures.
The number of arenas, basketball courts, indoor tennis courts, which are long span, are multiplying dramatically. And as the number of structures increase, the opportunity for a failure is increased.
Meanwhile, officials in Kansas City made public today the construction records for the Hyatt Regency. Based on those records and other findings, an architect and engineer hired by a Kansas City newspaper concluded that a change in design from the original plans put extra stress on the walkway structure and may have contributed to the collapse. And city officials told CBS News that there is preliminary evidence to suggest the disaster may have been caused by design failure. But architects for the hotel would make no comment on either report. And there are those who say the bigger problem is that too many architects are too concerned with aesthetics.
I am opposed to gee-whiz architecture and gee-whiz design. And I think that while it is part of the function of architecture and design to explore new avenues, you don't experiment on human beings.
And the city continued to bury its dead today. And in a mass memorial, the survivors continue to grieve their loss. Bernard Goldberg, CBS News, Kansas City.
Mehmet Ali Agca, the Turkish terrorist on trial in Rome for shooting the Pope, refused to leave his cell and come to court today as the prosecutor called him a merchant of death and told the court he should be jailed for life. Also today, the ailing Pope appeared on television from his hospital room. He said he had a new understanding of the plight of the sick and injured. The Pope's taped address was for a religious conference in France that he had planned to attend in person but couldn't because of his injuries. A young Polish national with a gun and a hand grenade hijacked a plane with 50 passengers aboard in Poland today, forced it to land at a U.S. base in West Berlin. The hijacker turned himself in to U.S. authorities. None of the passengers was harmed. There was no immediate word on the hijacker's motives. CBS News correspondent Charles Gomez reports from El Salvador that members of an elite Salvadoran brigade trained by U.S. advisors crossed the border into Honduras last week in pursuit of guerrilla forces there. 4 reporters interviewed a Salvadoran officer there. He denied he and his men were in Honduras. The cross-border operation was also denied by Honduran and Salvadoran government officials. As British Prime Minister Thatcher attended the economic summit in Ottawa today, there was bad economic news back home. Britain's unemployment rate rose to 11.8% in July, the worst since the Depression of the 1930s. Critics of Prime Minister Thatcher blame her economic policies and say lack of jobs is a major cause of the street riots there this month. And here is the final proof that no matter how carefully you plan it, it is absolutely impossible to have a wedding without one of the relatives getting his nose out of joint. From London, the BBC flashes word that the King and Queen of Spain are not coming to the wedding of their distant relations, Britain's Prince Charles and Lady Di. The Spanish King and Queen are apparently upset because the Prince intends to start his honeymoon by boarding the royal yacht at the British colony of Gibraltar, an area that Spain has always claimed. In the old days, this sort of thing could have led to war. This one won't, of course. But the word in London tonight is that Sunday's scheduled polo match between Great Britain and Spain may indeed be canceled.
Mr. Wells, I'll take this Cordaid cream. Marge, is your skin irritated too? We've been using new LanaCare. LanaCare? Hydrocortisone. It really works.
They're equally effective for eczema, rashes from dermatitis, and other minor skin irritations. And you can get both without a prescription. The big difference is LanaCare costs less.
Yeah, a lot less. I'm switching to LanaCare.
New LanaCare Hydrocortisone Cream from the makers of Lanacaine Cream.
Really effective and costs a lot less.
If you think you need extra strength pain relievers for headache relief, you should know this. A new medical study shows the amount of pain reliever in extra strength Tylenol is no more effective for headaches than Bayer aspirin. The fact is, there is no medical study proving that any pain reliever you can buy gives more headache relief than Bayer. Not Anacin, Excedrin, nothing. Why pay for extra medicine? For headaches, nothing gives you more relief than Bayer. Nothing.
Once again, an economic summit has ended with a communique that doesn't speak decisively to the most serious issues at hand. This was a show that didn't live up to advance billing. Despite the widespread expectation that there would be a storm over high U.S. interest rates, there was little more than a summer shower, with the Germans and the French making the point that high interest rates have an impact on their people, but then moving on. Clearly, the most important message at this summit was delivered by Israel's Air Force. And the Middle East, again, was a hot topic of debate. A French minister, in a briefing to the French-speaking press, called discussion of Israel's attacks the most emotional of last night's summit session. And we know that President Reagan came under intense pressure to get Israel to accept a ceasefire in Lebanon. Pressure first from West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, reportedly still smarting from a personal remark made about him from Israel's Prime Minister Begin last May, a remark in which Begin linked Schmidt and Nazism. And then pressure from Britain's Margaret Thatcher. Both of them reportedly asked President Reagan, "Can't you do something with Israel?" The president reportedly responded, "We're trying. Habib is over there. We're doing everything we can." Then there was this vignette. When configuration of the so-called family portrait was being negotiated, everything here is negotiated, President Reagan didn't want to be photographed standing next to Britain's Margaret Thatcher, whose conservative economic policies are under fire in her own country, nor next to French President Mitterrand, the socialist in the alliance. No contrasts, no comparisons. 7 years ago, the impetus for the first of these economic summits in France came from concern over wildly fluctuating international monetary rates and trade patterns. Those same concerns, in different guises, remain unsolved today, now shadowed by life and death concerns over the threat of new war in the Middle East. That's our report for this Tuesday. Until our special broadcast about the Economic Summit tonight at 11:30 Eastern Time, Dan Rather, CBS News, Ottawa.
I gotta get to a phone. Honey, take the kids and get on the plane.
We'll stay right here.
We're gonna make this vacation.
Come on. 14, now boarding through gate 5. American Express Refund Center.
We lost our traveler's checks.
Don't run.
They were gone.
Where did you purchase your checks? Where's Dad?
That's it? A full refund? Thanks.
The majority of people who call American Express have a full refund approved within 12 minutes. So ask for American Express by name.
Looking for someone?
Kellogg's Rice Krispies. It's the only cereal that talks to you, and that makes for great company in the morning. Crisp bits of toasted rice that say snap, crackle, pop. Kellogg's Rice Krispies. Great company in the morning.
Kellogg's will help you say it's gonna be a great day.
From CBS News in Ottawa, Canada, this has been the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather and Bob Schieffer in our newsroom in New York. This is CBS.
More charges about the quality of